A billionaire catches a 7-year-old boy stealing his wallet. My mom is sick, she needs medicine. The billionaire, furious, scoffs. Why don't you get your dad to pay for it? Only to freeze in shock when the boy looks him dead in the eyes and says, That's what I just tried to do. Thomas Graves barely registered the smell of roasted coffee and warm pastries as he stepped into the small cafe, his mind still tangled in the mess of the afternoon's board meeting. It had been one of those excruciating discussions where everyone pretended to have groundbreaking ideas while circling back to the same tired solutions. He needed caffeine, and he needed silence. The cafe, tucked away from the more crowded streets, was usually a safe bet for both. He ordered black coffee, nothing else. The barista handed it over quickly, and he moved to a quiet corner, loosening his tie as he scrolled through emails. A merger negotiation was stuck in limbo. An investor was making impossible demands. His assistant, Naomi, had sent 3 texts reminding him that his schedule tomorrow was packed, and no, he couldn't cancel the morning meeting just because he hated everyone in it. He took a sip of coffee, bitter and scalding, when something, a flicker of movement, caught his attention. Too late. His wallet gone from the table. Thomas turned sharply, his gaze locking onto the small figure slipping between tables. A boy, no older than 7 or 8, was making a beeline for the door. Hey! Thomas shot up, chair scraping against the floor as he lunged forward. His hand caught the boy's jacket, and the kid twisted, trying to wriggle free, but Thomas had a solid grip. The cafe went silent, all eyes on them. Let me go! The boy squirmed, but Thomas held firm. He was scrawny, his clothes slightly worn, sneakers scuffed. There was a streak of dirt on his cheek, and his dark eyes flashed with something between defiance and desperation. Thomas yanked the wallet from the kid's grip. Seriously? You thought you'd get away with this? The boy's shoulders rose like he was bracing for a worse reaction, but he still lifted his chin. I needed the money. Thomas narrowed his eyes. For what? The boy hesitated, like he hadn't expected to be asked. Then, in a voice both stubborn and unsteady, he said, My mom is sick. She needs medicine. Thomas exhaled sharply. The excuse was too predictable. Right. And I'm supposed to believe you? It's the truth. Why don't you ask your father for help? The boy went still. The defiance drained from his face, leaving something raw and unreadable. For a second, Thomas thought he was about to cry, but instead, he did something far worse. He looked him straight in the eye and said, clear as anything, That's what I just tried to do. Thomas's grip loosened. The boy took the opening and tore himself free, bolting out the door before Thomas's mind could catch up to what had just been said. By the time he snapped out of it, the kid was gone. He strode out onto the street, scanning the sidewalks, but the boy had disappeared into the crowd. He stood there for a moment, heart pounding harder than it should have been. It had to be a trick. Some kind of scam. But there was something in the way the kid had said it, that moment of silence before he spoke, like he wasn't just throwing out a lie but delivering a truth he hadn't wanted to say out loud. Thomas turned back into the cafe, ignoring the curious glances, grabbed his coffee, and walked out, pretending none of it had shaken him. He spent the drive back to his office trying to shove the thought away, but it lodged itself in his brain, stubborn as hell. When he stepped into his office, Naomi was waiting, tapping at her phone. She barely looked up before tossing a remark in his direction. You look like someone just told you your stocks crashed. He sank into his chair, rubbing his temple. Some kid tried to pickpocket me. That got her attention. And he said his mom is sick and needs medicine. She arched an eyebrow. Sounds like a classic sob story. Yeah, that's what I thought too. But, Thomas hesitated. He also said I was his father. Naomi's hand stopped mid-scroll. Slowly, she lowered the phone. I'm sorry, what? Thomas exhaled, pressing his fingers against his temples. Exactly what I just said. Kid told me he was stealing from me because I'm his father. There was a beat of silence. Then Naomi leaned against the desk, looking far too amused for his liking. Well, that's a fun twist. Do you have a long-lost child running around, Thomas? That's ridiculous. Is it? Yes. She crossed her arms. You sure? Because you haven't always been the most responsible when it comes to certain areas of life. Thomas shot her a flat look. Thank you for that analysis. I'm just saying, it's not impossible. He dragged a hand down his face. I don't have a kid. You sure? Because I can run a check. What's his name? Thomas paused. He had no idea. The kid had run off before he could ask. Naomi smirked. Not very thorough detective work, boss. He ignored her and turned to his computer, but his fingers hovered over the keyboard. There was only one name that stuck in his mind, Mia Carter. It had been years, but if he had to think about anyone who might be connected to this, it was her. They had been together briefly, and it had ended fast, but not badly. She had disappeared one day, no dramatic breakup, no long explanations. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now, he wasn't so sure. Naomi leaned against the desk again, watching him with far too much interest. So, are we investigating? Thomas clicked his email open. I'm busy. That's not a no. He didn't answer. But as he scrolled through endless business updates and meeting requests, he wasn't reading any of them. His mind was somewhere else entirely, stuck on a kid with too thin shoulders, defiant eyes, and a statement that had shattered his entire day. That's what I just tried to do. Thomas wasn't sure why, but he suddenly needed to know if the boy had been telling the truth. Thomas spent the rest of the evening in his office, ignoring the steady stream of emails piling up in his inbox. The kid's words stuck in his head, playing on a loop no matter how much he tried to push them aside. He had no children. That was a fact. And yet, something about the way the boy had looked at him, the certainty in his voice, had unsettled him in a way that logic couldn't explain. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to recall the women he had been involved with 7 or 8 years ago. There were a few names, but only one stuck. Mia Carter. Their relationship hadn't lasted long, just a few months, but it had been intense. He had liked her. More than he wanted to admit. She had been different from the women he usually went for, grounded, sharp, and uninterested in the circles he moved in. Then, without warning, she had ended things and disappeared. No messy breakup, no demands, just gone. At the time, he had assumed she wanted nothing to do with his world. He hadn't questioned it. Now he was. He pulled up his contacts, scrolling through old records, but there was nothing on her. She had vanished completely. He frowned, then turned to the one person who could find just about anything. Naomi barely looked up from her laptop when he stepped out of his office. You've got a meeting at 10 tomorrow, and no, you can't cancel it. Also, your PR team is still waiting for a response about that charity event. I told them you'd get back to them before next year. I need you to find someone. That got her attention. She closed her laptop and folded her arms. Who? Mia Carter. Naomi arched a brow, amused. Blast from the past. Why? I need to talk to her. Would this have anything to do with the street thief who called you Dad? Thomas didn't answer. Naomi smirked. I'll take that as a yes. She grabbed her phone, typing as she spoke. All right, give me a minute. I'll see if I can track her down. She worked fast. Within 20 minutes she had an address. Small apartment complex in Eastwood. Not exactly billionaire territory. Thomas took the slip of paper she handed him and glanced at the address. He recognized the area. A quieter part of the city, far from the luxury of his world. He slipped the paper into his pocket and grabbed his coat. You're going now? Naomi asked. I want answers. Right. Because people love surprise visits from exes demanding paternity tests. He ignored her and left. Lucas pushed the apartment door open, stepping inside quietly. Their place was small, just a tiny kitchen, a cramped living area, and one bedroom. The walls were bare except for a few old pictures, and the place smelled faintly of disinfectant and the tea his mother always made when she wasn't feeling well. Mia sat at the small table, a mug in her hands. Her face was pale, dark circles beneath her eyes, but she was awake. She glanced up when he entered, and the relief in her expression made his stomach twist. He hated worrying her, but he hadn't known what else to do. "Where were you?" Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. Lucas hesitated. "Nowhere." She set the mug down, rubbing her temples. "Lucas." He shifted his weight. "I was just trying to help." Mia's eyes sharpened. "What does that mean?" He swallowed. "I tried to get some money." Her face went completely still. "Lucas, what did you do?" He hesitated, but there was no point in lying. "I took a guy's wallet." Mia pushed her chair back, slow and controlled. "You stole?" He looked at the floor. "You need medicine." "Lucas." She sighed, running a hand over her face. "We don't do that. Ever." "I had to." "No, you didn't. We're getting by." "We're not." His voice came out louder than he meant it to, and her expression faltered. She was quiet for a moment. "Who did you take it from?" He hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, "My dad." Mia's whole body tensed. "I didn't mean to," Lucas added quickly. I saw him, and I knew who he was, and I thought maybe you saw him?" Her voice was tight. Lucas nodded. Her hands curled into fists on the table. "Did you tell him?" Lucas hesitated, then gave a small nod. She closed her eyes. "Lucas, I don't think he believed me." A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Mia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She stared at the door like she already knew who was on the other side. Lucas held his breath as she stepped forward and pulled it open. Thomas stood in the doorway. Mia said nothing at first, her grip tightening on the doorknob. For a second, Lucas thought she might slam it shut in his face. Thomas looked past her, spotting Lucas. His expression shifted, something unreadable flickering across his face. Mia's voice was steady, but Lucas knew that tone. It was the one she used when she was about to make someone leave. "What are you doing here?" Thomas didn't flinch. "I think you already know." Mia didn't answer. Lucas stepped closer, watching both of them. Thomas's gaze flicked to him again before returning to Mia. "Is he mine?" Mia exhaled slowly. "You don't get to show up after 7 years and ask that." That wasn't an answer. She hesitated. Lucas saw the way her fingers curled slightly, the way her jaw tightened. Then she let out a breath, softer this time. Before she could say anything, her body swayed. Lucas moved first, grabbing her arm, but she was already sinking toward the floor. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground. Lucas froze, unsure what to do. Thomas didn't hesitate. He lifted her easily, already moving. "Where's your car?" Lucas barely had time to grab his jacket before they were out the door. The hospital was quieter than Thomas expected, a stark contrast to the frantic rush of the emergency room where he had first carried Mia through the doors. Now, the hallway outside her room was empty, the only sounds the steady beep of monitors and the occasional murmur of nurses at their station down the hall. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, glancing at the closed door where Mia was resting. Lucas hadn't left her side since they arrived. He had been silent the entire drive, gripping his mother's hand while Thomas handled the check-in. The doctor's diagnosis had been pneumonia, severe, but treatable. She had been pushing herself too hard for too long, and it had finally caught up to her. The stress, the cold apartment, the constant worry, it had all piled up until her body couldn't take it anymore. Thomas had seen the exhaustion on her face before she collapsed, but he hadn't realized how bad it was. He exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't belong here. Hospitals weren't places he spent time in unless it was for some charity event where he was shaking hands with executives. But this was different. The door cracked open, and Lucas peeked out, his small face tight with worry. "She's sleeping," he whispered. Thomas nodded, glancing toward the nurse's station. "She'll be fine. The doctors said she just needs rest." Lucas hesitated, then nodded, but his grip on the doorframe didn't loosen. It was clear he wasn't convinced. Thomas shifted, unsure what to say. He wasn't good at this, comforting people, especially kids. The last time he'd been around one for any extended period of time was never. He cleared his throat. "They'll keep her here for a few days to make sure she's okay." Lucas frowned. "She hates hospitals." "Most people do." The kid didn't respond, just stared at the floor. Thomas wasn't sure why, but the sight of him like that, small, uncertain, bothered him more than he expected. He sighed and pulled out his phone. "Here," he said, pulling up a game and handing it to Lucas. "Something to do while you wait." Lucas blinked at him, clearly surprised. Then, hesitantly, he took the phone and stepped back into the room. The door clicked shut behind him. Thomas rubbed his face and turned, only to find Naomi standing a few feet away, watching him with raised brows. "You look like someone just realized parenting is harder than running a company." Thomas sighed. "How did you even get here so fast?" "Because I'm efficient, unlike you, who apparently took the long way around to realizing you have a son." He didn't respond, not in the mood for her sarcasm. Naomi, of course, didn't care. She tilted her head toward the room. "So? What's the plan?" Thomas glanced at the closed door, then back at her. "She's getting the best care possible. That's all that matters." Naomi studied him. "And after that?" Thomas didn't answer. She crossed her arms. "You're not actually considering walking away from this, are you?" He let out a breath, shoulders tightening. "She doesn't want my help. She doesn't want your money," Naomi corrected. "That's not the same thing." Thomas glanced down the hall, as if looking for an escape route. Naomi didn't let up. "So what, you cover the bills, walk away, and pretend this never happened?" Thomas frowned. "What else am I supposed to do? She didn't tell me about him for a reason." Naomi gave him a look. "You really don't get it, do you?" Thomas crossed his arms. "Enlighten me. She didn't tell you because she didn't think you'd care. She thought you'd be the same guy you were 8 years ago, too busy, too detached, too self-involved." Naomi paused, letting that sink in. "And honestly, you're proving her right." Thomas exhaled slowly, turning away. He wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. The door opened again, and Lucas stepped out. He hesitated, glancing between them. "She's awake." Thomas nodded and followed him inside. Mia looked worse than before, but she was sitting up, her expression unreadable as she watched him enter. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke. "I don't need your charity." Thomas didn't sit. "It's not charity. It's common sense. You're sick. You need treatment. That's not up for debate." She didn't argue, but her hands tightened in her lap. Lucas sat on the bed beside her, clutching her sleeve. Thomas noticed how close he stayed, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "I want the truth," Thomas said. "Is he mine?" Mia exhaled, long and slow. For a moment, she looked like she might fight him on it. But then her shoulders dropped, and she nodded. Thomas's stomach tightened. He had known, or at least suspected, but hearing her confirm it made it real in a way that left him momentarily speechless. Mia watched him carefully. "I didn't tell you because I knew what kind of father you'd be. The kind that sends money but never shows up. Lucas deserves better than that." Thomas clenched his jaw. "You didn't give me the chance to prove you wrong." Mia let out a weak laugh. "Would you have?" Thomas didn't have an answer. The room fell silent. Lucas watched them both, something uncertain in his expression. Thomas could see the gears turning in his head, the way he studied them like he was piecing something together. It struck Thomas then, Lucas had spent his whole life without a father. He had no idea what this moment meant. He was just waiting, hoping for something Thomas wasn't sure he could give. Thomas turned to Mia. "I'm not walking away," she scoffed. "That's easy to say now. But what about when this gets hard? When you get bored? When your life gets in the way?" He exhaled through his nose. "I'll help financially. Whatever you need." Lucas flinched, just slightly, but Thomas caught it. Mia sighed. "He doesn't need your money. He needs a dad." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know how to be that." Mia's voice softened, just a little. "Then learn." Thomas looked at Lucas again, and something in the kid's expression made him pause. Hope. Hesitant, small, but there. Mia spoke again, quiet but firm. 1 month. Try. If you still want to leave after that, I won't stop you. Thomas hesitated, but he already knew his answer. Fine. Lucas looked up, eyes wide. Mia nodded, as if she had expected that outcome. Thomas had no idea what he had just agreed to. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to walk away. Thomas had expected a lot of things when he agreed to Mia's 1-month deal. He expected resistance, tension, maybe a few awkward conversations. What he hadn't expected was just how exhausting a 7-year-old could be. The first week was a blur of logistics. Mia was discharged from the hospital but still needed time to recover, and there was no way Thomas was letting her go back to that cramped apartment with the flickering hallway light and the radiator that barely worked. She fought him on it, of course, but she was too weak to argue properly, and he had already signed the lease on a better place before she could come up with a way to stop him. The new apartment was in a quiet neighborhood, nothing flashy but clean and safe, with a second bedroom for Lucas and a kitchen that actually had space to cook. Mia had looked around warily when they moved in, like she was afraid to get comfortable, but Lucas had immediately taken off exploring, running from room to room as if checking to make sure it was real. It should have felt like progress. Maybe it was. But now, with Mia needing rest and Thomas holding up his end of the deal, he found himself facing a problem he had never considered. He had absolutely no idea how to take care of a kid. Lucas, unfortunately, figured that out almost immediately. Thomas had been prepared for some resistance, but nothing had prepared him for a 7-year-old who acted like a seasoned interrogator. Lucas asked a million questions, most of them designed to poke holes in Thomas's competence. Why did he wear suits all the time? Why did he have a driver if he had a license? Did he even know how to make a peanut butter sandwich? Why did he act like he was allergic to fun? Thomas ignored most of it, but the suit comment had gotten under his skin enough that he had shown up the next morning in jeans and a t-shirt, expecting Lucas to drop it. Instead, Lucas had grinned and said, "You almost look normal." Thomas wasn't sure if that was a compliment. By the third day, he realized he had no idea how to handle basic parenting tasks. Mia was too tired to intervene much, so Thomas had been left to deal with things on his own. Homework was an absolute disaster. The first night, Lucas had shoved a math worksheet at him and Thomas had barely glanced at it before answering every question in his head within seconds. When he started explaining how to do the problems, Lucas had given him a blank stare and asked, "Are you even speaking English?" Cooking was no better. He had assumed a 7-year-old would be easy to feed, but Lucas was suspicious of everything he made. The first attempt, a simple pasta dish, had ended with Lucas staring at the plate for a solid minute before pushing it away and muttering, "I think I liked you better when you were just a billionaire." Thomas had resorted to ordering takeout. The only thing he had gotten right, surprisingly, was bedtime. Lucas, for all his energy, had a routine, and despite Thomas's reluctance, he had ended up being the one to enforce it. At first, Lucas resisted, complaining that Thomas didn't know how things worked. But Thomas, used to running an entire company, wasn't about to be outmaneuvered by a child. He made sure the kid brushed his teeth, got into bed, and stayed there. It was the only time Lucas didn't fight him. Then, one night, Thomas was halfway through an email when he heard something from the other room. It was quiet at first, just a soft whimper, but then he heard it again. He hesitated. He could ignore it. Mia was asleep, and it would probably pass. But then there was a small, muffled sob. Thomas sighed, shutting his laptop. He found Lucas curled up in his bed, tangled in the sheets, face pressed into his pillow. His breathing was uneven, the way it got when someone had been crying for a while. Thomas hesitated in the doorway, unsure what to do. Lucas must have sensed him there because he turned over, eyes still wet. He sniffed and wiped his face quickly. Thomas frowned. "What's wrong?" Lucas shook his head. "Nothing." Thomas wasn't great at emotions, but even he knew that was a lie. He stepped further into the room, crossing his arms. "If it's nothing, why are you crying?" Lucas stayed quiet. Then, after a long moment, he mumbled, "I had a bad dream." Thomas waited for him to continue, but he didn't. "About what?" Lucas hesitated. "Mom." Thomas's stomach tightened. "What about her?" Lucas sniffed again, looking away. "She got sick again. But this time she didn't wake up." Thomas wasn't sure what to say to that. He wasn't good at this part, the reassuring, emotional side of things. But Lucas was still staring at the blankets, his fingers gripping the fabric like he was trying to hold on to something solid. Thomas exhaled slowly. "She's okay," he said. "She's getting better." Lucas didn't look convinced. "She is," Thomas repeated. "The doctors wouldn't have let her leave if she wasn't." Lucas didn't say anything, but his grip on the blanket loosened slightly. Thomas wasn't sure why, but he sat down on the edge of the bed. It felt awkward, like he was intruding, but Lucas didn't tell him to leave. After a moment, Lucas shifted under the covers. "You don't have to stay." Thomas hesitated. Then he leaned back against the headboard. "I'll stay for a little while." Lucas didn't say anything, but after a few minutes, his breathing evened out, and he drifted back to sleep. Thomas stayed longer than he meant to. By the end of the first week, Mia was moving around more, watching quietly as Thomas and Lucas navigated their new routine. He caught her observing him sometimes, something unreadable in her expression. He wasn't sure if she was surprised or just waiting for him to mess up. The thing was, he wasn't sure he wanted to. Somehow, without realizing it, he had started looking forward to the chaos of the day. He was getting used to Lucas's nonstop commentary, to the weird little routines they had fallen into. The kid was exhausting, but he was also sharp and funny, and Thomas found himself enjoying their back and forth more than he wanted to admit. He had agreed to a month. At first, he had been counting the days. Now, for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to. Thomas had stopped counting the days. Somewhere in the chaos of school drop-offs, terrible cooking attempts, and Lucas talking his ear off about whatever new obsession he had that week, time had stopped feeling like something he was measuring. It had stopped feeling like something temporary. Lucas had started calling him Dad, sometimes without realizing it. It had happened the first time at the grocery store. Thomas had been distracted, comparing two brands of cereal, when Lucas, standing beside the cart, had tugged on his sleeve and asked, "Dad, can we get the chocolate kind?" Thomas had frozen for a second, but Lucas hadn't even noticed, already turning back to scan the shelves for more snacks he probably wasn't allowed to have. It had happened again at the park. A kid had pushed past Lucas on the playground, and without thinking, he had run up to Thomas and said, "Dad, did you see that?" Like it was natural. Like it had always been this way. Mia had noticed. She didn't say anything, but she watched them more closely, like she was trying to figure out if this was real or just another temporary thing in a life that had given her too many reasons not to trust permanence. Thomas didn't have an answer for her. He only knew that, for the first time in his life, he felt something that wasn't tied to his job, his money, or the endless demands of his world. It was quieter than that. Simpler. And then everything fell apart. The first sign was the phone call from Naomi. It was early, too early for her usual sarcastic updates, and when Thomas answered, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "Do not look at the news." Thomas, already suspicious, pulled up his tablet before she could stop him. The headline hit him like a punch. Billionaire Thomas Graves' secret love child exposed. The woman behind the scandal speaks out. Below it was a picture of Mia, taken from some old social media account, and next to it, a blurred image of Lucas. The article went on to speculate about the timeline, the circumstances, and whether Mia had trapped Thomas into fatherhood. There were phrases like hidden paternity scandal and gold digger mother thrown around, along with a half-baked claim that Lucas had been an unwanted mistake. Thomas's stomach turned. "How bad is it?" he asked. Naomi sighed. "You tell me. The press is camping outside your office. And outside Mia's apartment." Thomas's grip tightened on the tablet. "Who leaked this?" "Someone with access to old personal records, probably. It's a mess." Thomas didn't hesitate. "Call legal. Call PR. Shut it down." Naomi hesitated. "This isn't just your usual PR mess, Thomas. This isn't about you. It's about them." Thomas knew she was right. He grabbed his keys and left. By the time he got to Mia's place, the sidewalk was a disaster. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. He barely had time to push through before someone recognized him, and suddenly they were calling his name, throwing questions at him. "When did you find out about your son? Is it true Mia Carter hid him from you? Are you going to claim full custody?" He forced himself to ignore them, shoving his way to the door. It took him a second to get inside, and when he did, he was met with Mia's furious glare. Lucas was curled on the couch, pale and too quiet. Mia stood with her arms crossed, her face tight with barely restrained anger. "Get out." Thomas shut the door behind him. "I didn't do this." She let out a sharp laugh. "Does it matter? It still happened." He glanced at Lucas, who was staring at the floor, his fingers curled into the fabric of the couch. He was scared. And Thomas had no idea how to fix it. Mia stepped closer, voice low and controlled. "This is exactly why I never told you about him. I knew this would happen. I knew the second your world found out about him, they'd turn him into a headline." Thomas exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to stay calm. "I'm going to fix it." Mia shook her head. "You can't. They'll keep digging. They'll follow us. Lucas can't even go outside without cameras in his face." "I can move you somewhere safer," Thomas said. "I have places. Private, secure. We don't need your money, Thomas. We just need peace." Lucas flinched. Mia turned away, running a hand through her hair, pacing the small space between the couch and the kitchen. Thomas clenched his jaw. He had handled billion-dollar crises, had stared down rooms of board members who wanted him to fail, but none of it compared to this, watching his son curl into himself while the world picked apart his existence like it was gossip. He wasn't used to feeling powerless. He hated it. Mia stopped pacing and exhaled sharply. "I'm taking him away for a while." Thomas stiffened. "What?" "We need space. No cameras. No reporters." Thomas turned to Lucas, who was watching the two of them with something close to panic. "Are you leaving?" Lucas asked. Thomas's chest tightened. "No." Lucas frowned. "But Mom said I'm not leaving," Thomas repeated. "I'm not going anywhere." Lucas's fingers clenched tighter around the couch. Mia sighed, rubbing her face. "We just need time to figure this out." Thomas swallowed the frustration rising in his throat. He had spent his whole life building something no one could take from him. Power, wealth, control. None of it meant anything right now. Lucas looked at him, eyes full of something unsteady. Thomas exhaled. "I'll make this right." Lucas didn't say anything. He just nodded, once, and it nearly broke Thomas more than anything else had. Mia crossed her arms again. "If you really mean that, prove it." Thomas knew she wasn't talking about the scandal. She was talking about everything else. About them. He nodded. Mia didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. Not this time. Lucas glanced between them again, still waiting for something neither of them could promise. Thomas turned to Mia. "Let me protect you." Mia's jaw tightened, but she didn't say no. For now, that was enough. Mia had made up her mind. There was no convincing her, no reasoning with her, no last-minute compromise that would change what was coming. The bags were packed, the travel plans set, and Lucas, too young to argue with something he didn't understand, just watched the entire thing unfold with quiet confusion. Thomas stood by the apartment door, arms crossed, jaw tight, trying not to let the weight of it sink in too soon. The reporters were still out there, scattered like scavengers on the sidewalks, waiting for more drama to unfold. He had managed to get some of them cleared out with legal threats and a PR statement condemning the press for harassing a child, but it wouldn't last. The damage had been done. Mia was convinced the only solution was to run. Lucas lingered near his suitcase, picking at the zipper, his usual energy nowhere to be found. Thomas had never seen him so still before. It unsettled him more than the shouting, more than the attitude, more than anything. "I thought Dad was staying with us," Lucas finally said, quiet but clear. Mia stopped adjusting the bag in her hands. She inhaled deeply, then turned to him, keeping her voice calm. "It's just for a little while, sweetheart. Until things settle down." Lucas frowned. "I don't want to go." Mia's face softened, but she stood firm. "It's better this way." Thomas exhaled slowly, the words hitting harder than they should have. He had seen this coming, had known Mia wouldn't risk Lucas being dragged further into the mess his world created, but knowing didn't make it any easier. Lucas turned to Thomas. "You're not coming?" Thomas clenched his fists, feeling a strange kind of helplessness he wasn't used to. He was a man who fixed things. He took control, he found solutions, he negotiated outcomes that suited him. But this? He had no say. "I want to," he said carefully. "But your mom thinks it's best if I stay here." Lucas looked at Mia again, something close to betrayal crossing his small face. "I don't get it. You said we were a family now." Thomas saw the way Mia flinched. She looked away, adjusting the strap on her bag even though it didn't need adjusting. Lucas's voice got smaller. "Was that a lie?" Thomas couldn't stand it anymore. He crouched down so they were at eye level. "Listen to me, okay? This doesn't change anything. I'm still your dad." He kept his voice steady, making sure Lucas heard every word. "No matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere." Lucas nodded, but the doubt was still there, buried in the silence between them. Mia checked the time. "We need to go." Lucas hesitated, then threw his arms around Thomas's neck in a quick, tight hug before grabbing his bag and stepping toward the door. Thomas watched as Mia led him outside, watched as Lucas glanced back one last time before disappearing down the hall. And then they were gone. Thomas stood there for a long time, staring at the door like if he waited long enough, it would open again. The apartment felt wrong without them in it. It had only been a month, but it was enough to make the emptiness feel suffocating. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out of his pocket and answered without thinking. "You let them leave?" Naomi's voice, sharp as ever. "What was I supposed to do? Force them to stay?" She sighed. "No, but I figured you'd at least put up more of a fight." Thomas didn't respond. There was a pause, then Naomi spoke again, this time with something quieter in her tone. "You're a billionaire who can buy anything. But can you earn the right to be a father?" Thomas let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. Naomi continued. "You had everything handed to you, Thomas. Your company, your wealth, none of it was ever in question. But this isn't something you can write a check for. You have to prove it." "I know," Thomas said. And for the first time, he truly did. Lucas hated the new town. It was quiet, too quiet, with nothing but trees and old buildings and a house that smelled like lavender because his aunt insisted on using too many scented candles. His mom said it was temporary, but he didn't know what that meant. At first, he told himself it didn't matter. He could get used to it. He could make it work. But the days stretched too long, and no matter how much he tried, nothing felt right. He missed home. Not the apartment, not the city, just home. He missed the back and forth with Thomas, the dumb jokes, the way Thomas pretended to be annoyed when Lucas talked too much, but never actually told him to stop. He missed waking up and knowing that if he walked into the kitchen, Thomas would be there, pretending he knew how to cook breakfast. He even missed the arguments about bedtime, because even when Thomas was enforcing rules, he never felt like he was waiting for Lucas to leave. One night, after Mia tucked him in, he stared up at the ceiling for a long time before finally whispering, "Did you leave Dad because you don't love him?" The question hung in the air. Mia, who had been smoothing his blanket, stilled. Lucas turned to her. "Because if you do, we should go back." Mia opened her mouth, then closed it again. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking at him like she wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how. Finally, she exhaled. "It's not that simple, sweetheart." Lucas frowned. "But do you?" She didn't answer. Lucas stared at her for a long time, waiting. When she didn't say anything, he rolled onto his side, facing the wall. Mia reached out, brushing his hair gently. "Get some sleep, okay?" Lucas didn't respond. Mia turned off the light and left the room, but he stayed awake, thinking about the way she hadn't answered. Thomas had never been one for hesitating. His entire life was built on decisions made quickly and confidently, cutting through uncertainty with precision. But when he pulled up in front of Mia's sister's house, he found himself gripping the steering wheel, staring at the small, quiet home for longer than necessary. It was a modest place, nothing like the towering glass buildings and sprawling penthouses he was used to. The porch light flickered slightly, and the yard had toys scattered across the grass, evidence of a home that was lived in rather than just occupied. It was unfamiliar territory, but Thomas wasn't here to admire the surroundings. He was here because walking away wasn't an option. Not anymore. He stepped out of the car, took a breath, and knocked. Mia answered. She didn't look surprised to see him, but she also didn't look particularly pleased. Her arms were crossed before he even spoke, her stance wary, like she was already preparing to shut him down. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" He could hear voices inside, a faint sound of a television, the quiet hum of an evening winding down. He had no idea what to say to make this easier, so he settled for the truth. "I don't want to be a visitor in my son's life," he said, voice steady. "I want to be his father. And I want to be here for you, too. If you'll let me." Mia didn't move, didn't react right away. She just studied him, searching for cracks in his resolve. "I don't want another promise, Thomas," she finally said. "I don't want words. I want proof." Thomas nodded. "Then I'll prove it." Mia exhaled slowly, rubbing her temple. "It's not that simple." "It is to me," he said. "I've spent my life making complicated things simple. This is the first time I'm choosing the hard way. And I'm okay with that." Mia hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come inside before the neighbors start watching." He stepped in, shutting the door behind him. Lucas was on the couch, flipping through channels absent-mindedly, but the second he saw Thomas, he sat up straighter, eyes wide with something Thomas hadn't seen in weeks: hope. Thomas gave him a small nod. "Hey, kid!" Lucas scrambled off the couch and ran toward him, stopping just short, like he wasn't sure if he should actually hug him or not. Instead, he just grinned, bouncing slightly on his feet. "I thought you weren't coming." Thomas crouched to his level. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere." Lucas stared at him for a second, then nodded, like he was locking the words away somewhere safe. Mia watched them, arms still crossed, but some of the sharpness in her expression had softened. She wasn't convinced yet, but she wasn't pushing him out the door, either. That was enough for now. Thomas stayed. Not permanently, not all at once, but he made it clear that he wasn't just passing through. He started coming by regularly, making the drive from the city without excuse. Some days he stayed late, helping Lucas with his homework, even though he was terrible at explaining basic math in a way a 7-year-old could understand. Other times, he took him out for ice cream, just the two of them, making up for the years he had missed in small ways. Lucas tested him, at first. Pushing boundaries, asking questions that had no easy answers. "Are you going to get bored of this?" he had asked once, voice casual but not really. "Of us?" Thomas had answered without hesitation. "Never." Lucas had nodded, but he hadn't looked convinced. It took time, but slowly the hesitation started to fade. Mia, however, was a different story. She watched from the sidelines, observing more than engaging, waiting to see if Thomas's resolve would crack. She didn't trust easily, and Thomas didn't blame her. He had spent years proving he didn't belong in their lives. 1 month wasn't enough to undo all of that. But he didn't rush it. He let her see him show up. He let her see him stay. And then, one evening, after Lucas had finally fallen asleep, Thomas found himself sitting at the kitchen table with Mia, the only sound in the house the quiet buzz of the refrigerator, and the occasional creak of settling wood. She took a sip of tea, her fingers wrapped around the mug like she needed something to hold on to. "I thought you'd leave." Thomas leaned back slightly, folding his hands together. "I told you I wouldn't." Mia let out a short breath, almost a laugh but not quite. "You say that now." "I'll say it tomorrow, too." She shook her head, staring down at her drink. "I was scared," she admitted. "Not just of you leaving. Of believing you wouldn't." Thomas watched her, the weight of her words settling between them. She met his gaze, something hesitant but honest in her expression. "For years I told myself we were better off without you. That I made the right choice. That I had to do it alone." Thomas stayed quiet, letting her speak. "But these past few weeks..." She trailed off, shaking her head again. "Lucas is happier with you around. And I hate that part of me is, too." Thomas exhaled, leaning forward slightly. "I never realized how empty my life was before him," he said, voice lower than usual. "Before both of you." Mia looked up, surprised. "I spent years thinking I had everything I wanted," Thomas continued. "But I didn't even know what was missing." He hesitated, then added, "I don't want to go back to who I was. I like who I am when I'm with him." A pause. "And when I'm with you." Mia swallowed, gripping the mug tighter. "Thomas, I'm not asking for anything," he said. "Not yet. I just wanted you to know." Mia didn't respond right away. She just sat there, watching him, trying to decide if she could trust what he was saying. Thomas let her take her time. The past wasn't erased, but something else had taken its place. Something new, something uncertain but real. And for the first time, Thomas wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. He was ready for it. Time moved differently now. It wasn't marked by business deals or quarterly reports, but by school drop-offs, bedtime stories, and the steady rhythm of life that Thomas had once thought he was too busy for. What started as an agreement, a test, had become something permanent. He no longer kept track of how long it had been since Mia and Lucas had left town, because they had come back, and when they did, there was no longer a question of whether he belonged. He just did. Lucas no longer hesitated when he called him Dad. It slipped out naturally, in conversation, in laughter, in frustration when Thomas made him eat vegetables. And every time it did, Thomas felt it settle into place, like something that had been waiting to be claimed. Mia watched all of it happen. She didn't say much at first, but she saw the way Thomas adjusted his schedule to make time for Lucas, the way he took over bedtime stories even though he was terrible at voices, the way he figured out how to make grilled cheese properly after Lucas declared his first attempt. An insult to sandwiches everywhere. She noticed the small things, too, how Thomas no longer checked his phone constantly, How he started carrying snacks in his car because Lucas always seemed to get hungry at inconvenient times. How he stayed even on the hard days, the ones where Lucas was moody or Mia was exhausted and there was no easy fix. One evening, she walked into the living room to find Thomas sitting on the floor, struggling to braid her hair while Lucas instructed him like a tiny drill sergeant. "It's a dad's skill," Lucas said seriously. "You have to learn." "I don't think this is a required skill," Thomas muttered, attempting to untangle his latest attempt. "It is," Lucas insisted. "Mom always does my hair when it gets in my face. If you're gonna be my dad, you need to know how to do it too." Thomas sighed, then refocused, trying again. Mia leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a smile tugging at her lips. She hadn't expected to feel so much watching him stumble his way into fatherhood, but it was there, a quiet warmth she wasn't sure how to name. She had spent so long expecting him to leave. And he hadn't. Months passed, and life settled into something steady. And then Lucas's 8th birthday arrived. Thomas had thought about the gift for a long time. He had considered buying something expensive, something big, but every time he imagined it, it didn't feel right. Lucas didn't need more things. He needed something that mattered. Something that lasted. So when the day came, Thomas sat Lucas down and placed an envelope in front of him. Lucas looked at it, then back at him. "Is this, like, a really boring present?" Thomas smirked. "Open it." Lucas tore it open with the enthusiasm of a kid expecting money, but as he pulled out the papers and scanned them, his brow furrowed. He looked up, confused. "What is this?" Thomas cleared his throat, suddenly feeling the weight of the moment. "It's adoption papers," he said. "If you want, I'd like to make it official." Lucas stared at him. The paper in his hands shook slightly. "You don't have to decide now," Thomas added quickly. "You can take time to think about it." Lucas launched himself at him so fast Thomas barely had time to react before he was clinging to him, face pressed into his shoulder. His voice came out muffled. "You already are." Thomas swallowed hard, wrapping his arms around him. Mia, watching from across the room, let out a slow breath. She had thought she was prepared for this, but something in her chest ached in a way she hadn't expected. She had spent so long keeping her guard up, so long waiting for the other shoe to drop, but now, watching Thomas and Lucas, seeing the way Thomas held their son like he would never let go, something inside her finally gave way. She stepped forward. Thomas looked up at her, something unspoken passing between them, something that had been waiting for too long. Mia didn't hesitate. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't about passion or longing. It was about trust. About home. About family. When she pulled back, Lucas grinned between them. "Does this mean we're, like, a real family now?" Mia glanced at Thomas, something warm in her gaze. Thomas squeezed Lucas's shoulder. "Yeah, buddy. That's exactly what it means." Lucas beamed, then took off toward the kitchen, yelling about birthday cake. Thomas and Mia stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. No more doubts. No more running. Just together. The years passed in ways Thomas never expected. Parenthood wasn't something that happened all at once, it crept up on him, shifting and changing as Lucas grew. The boy who once fit perfectly under his arm was suddenly getting taller, his voice changing, his opinions sharpening. He went from clinging to Thomas's hand to rolling his eyes at him, from asking endless questions to acting like he had all the answers. Thomas had built an empire, negotiated billion-dollar deals, but nothing had prepared him for the experience of raising a teenager. Lucas was 15 now, and every day was a new challenge. The quick-witted, energetic kid Thomas had gotten used to had turned into a moody, sarcastic teenager who slept too much, ate everything in sight, and had a newfound love for testing his patience. "You have a meeting at 8, Thomas reminded him one morning, tapping on his bedroom door. Lucas groaned from under the blankets. "Meeting? What meeting?" "Parent-teacher conference." "That's not a meeting," Lucas mumbled. That's a trap. Thomas opened the door, arms crossed. Get up. Lucas peeked out from under the covers. Can't you just send Naomi? She's way better at handling people than you. Thomas sighed. I'm not sending my assistant to your conference. Lucas groaned again but dragged himself out of bed, dramatically throwing on a hoodie like the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. Mia, watching from the kitchen, hid a smile behind her coffee mug. You know, he gets that attitude from you, she said as Thomas joined her. I was never this difficult, Thomas muttered. Mia arched a brow. Really? Because Naomi would beg to differ. Naomi, who had become a permanent fixture in their lives, had taken to calling herself Lucas's business consultant, which mostly meant giving him advice Thomas didn't approve of and teaching him negotiation tactics that he used against them. When they got to the conference, Thomas sat stiffly in the tiny plastic chair while Lucas slouched next to him, playing with a pen like he was waiting for a sentencing. The teacher, a woman who had clearly been dealing with teenagers for too long, smiled politely and flipped through her notes. Lucas is a bright student, she started. Lucas grinned. See, Dad? I'm a delight. The teacher continued. But he's also easily distracted, constantly finds ways to debate his assignments, and has a habit of negotiating for extra credit instead of actually turning in the work on time. Thomas turned slowly toward Lucas, who was suddenly very interested in the ceiling tiles. Mia had been right. He was exactly like Thomas. After the meeting, Thomas waited until they were in the car before saying, Negotiating grades instead of earning them? Lucas shrugged. You always say work smarter, not harder. Thomas pinched the bridge of his nose. That's for business. Not homework. Lucas grinned. Same thing, isn't it? Thomas sighed. Despite the occasional academic battles, Lucas was growing into his own. He had Thomas's sharp mind but Mia's way of reading people. He was quick on his feet, confident in ways that sometimes made Thomas proud and sometimes made him want to lock him in his room for his own protection. But parenting wasn't just about keeping him in check, it was about being there, even when it was hard. Like the night Lucas came home, unusually quiet, his face set in something tense. Thomas had learned over the years that sometimes, silence was more telling than words. He waited until they were alone before asking, What happened? Lucas hesitated, then exhaled. Some kids were talking about you today. Saying I only get into places because I'm your son. Thomas's jaw tightened. He knew what it was like to have people assume your worth was attached to your last name. They're wrong, Thomas said simply. Lucas looked down at the table. Doesn't feel like it. Thomas leaned forward. You're not me, Lucas. You don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself. Lucas sat with that for a long moment before finally nodding. Mia, who had been listening from the other room, later told Thomas. He listens to you more than he lets on. Thomas wasn't sure if that was true, but he wanted to believe it. As the years passed, things changed, but some things stayed the same. Their home was still filled with laughter and bickering, with Lucas testing limits and Thomas trying, and often failing, to keep up. One night, Mia walked into the living room to find Thomas standing in the doorway of Lucas's room, watching him sleep. She leaned against the frame. You okay? Thomas nodded but didn't look away. He's growing up too fast. Mia smiled softly. That's what they do. Thomas exhaled. I keep thinking I have more time. Mia reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. You're doing fine, Thomas. For the first time in his life, he believed that. Years ago, he had been a man who thought success meant never stopping, never looking back. Now, standing in the quiet of their home, holding the hand of the woman he had fought so hard to keep, watching the son he had once almost lost, Thomas realized something. This was success. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. The day Lucas graduated high school, Thomas finally understood what it meant to feel time slip through his fingers. It had happened gradually, in small moments, A few extra inches in height, the shift in his voice, the way he had stopped asking for permission and started making his own decisions. Thomas had been there for all of it, and yet, as he stood in the crowd, watching his son step onto the stage in his cap and gown, it still caught him off guard. Mia stood beside him, clutching his arm, her eyes locked on Lucas as he accepted his diploma. Naomi, standing on Thomas's other side, elbowed him lightly. "You gonna cry?" she whispered, barely hiding her smirk. Thomas shot her a glare. "No. Liar," she muttered. And maybe she was right, because there was something in his chest, something heavier than pride, something impossible to put into words. Lucas turned his head, scanning the audience, and when he spotted Thomas, Mia, and Naomi standing together, he grinned and lifted his diploma high in the air. Mia let out a small, shaky laugh. Thomas just nodded, the only response he could manage. After the ceremony, they met Lucas outside, where the graduates were spilling onto the lawn with their families, laughter and excitement filling the air. Lucas barely had time to say anything before Mia pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas grinned. "Mom, you're gonna cry." "Shut up," she muttered, but she didn't let go. When she finally released him, Lucas turned to Thomas, rocking back on his heels like he wasn't sure what to say. Thomas clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You did good, kid." Lucas beamed. "I know." Thomas smirked. "Still humble, I see." Naomi reached over and ruffled Lucas's hair. "Not bad, kid. If you ever need a job, call me. Someone's gotta keep this company running after your dad finally admits I'm better at it than he is." Lucas grinned. "Noted." The celebration lasted late into the evening. The house was full of laughter, food, and friends who had become family. And through it all, Thomas kept glancing at Lucas, unable to fully believe that the same boy who had once stolen his wallet in desperation had grown into this smart, confident, ready for the world. A few weeks later, Lucas packed for college. Thomas helped him load the car, though help mostly consisted of standing there, watching, while Lucas shoved his things haphazardly into boxes. Mia kept asking if he had everything he needed. Lucas, exasperated, assured her for the 10th time that he did. When it was finally time to leave, Thomas walked him to the driver's side, resting a hand on the door. "You sure about this?" he asked, more out of habit than doubt. Lucas smirked. "Dad, we've had this conversation." Thomas sighed. "I know." Lucas hesitated, glancing between Thomas and Mia. "You guys are gonna be okay without me, right?" Mia smiled. "We'll survive." Thomas nodded. "Barely." Lucas grinned then, without warning, threw his arms around Thomas in a quick but firm hug. Thomas froze for half a second before returning it, patting his back once. When Lucas pulled away, he smirked. "You gonna cry?" Thomas scoffed. "Get in the car." Lucas laughed, climbed in, and drove off. Mia slipped her hand into Thomas's as they watched him disappear down the road. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy. It wasn't empty. Mia squeezed his fingers. "We did good." Thomas exhaled. "Yeah. We did." Years passed. Mia and Thomas officially got married in a small ceremony, nothing extravagant, just family, friends, and Lucas standing proudly as Thomas's best man. His speech, predictably, was a mix of heartfelt and insufferable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas had said, holding up his glass, "when I first met Thomas, I stole his wallet. He yelled at me. I yelled back. And somehow, that turned into the best thing that ever happened to me." He paused, glancing at Mia, then back at Thomas. "But in all seriousness, I don't just have a dad now. I have a family. And I wouldn't trade that for anything." Thomas, who had spent his entire life knowing how to command a room, was left completely speechless. Naomi, of course, had whispered, "Told you you'd cry." Thomas ignored her. He stepped back from his company more and more, handing over the reins to Naomi, who was more than ready to take charge. His priorities had changed. Work no longer defined him. Power no longer drove him. Lucas came home during holidays, bringing stories of his own adventures, carving his own path. He had no interest in running Thomas's company, and Thomas never asked him to. That had never been the point. One evening, years after everything had started, Thomas and Mia sat on their porch, watching the sunset. Lucas had just left after a long visit, and the house was quiet again. Mia leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder. "Do you ever miss the way things used to be?" Thomas thought about it. About the early days, when everything was messy and uncertain, when he hadn't known if he was capable of being a father, if Mia would ever fully trust him. He looked at her, at their life, at everything they had built together. "No," he said. "This is better." She smiled, lacing her fingers through his. Ahead of them, the road stretched out, full of unknowns, full of possibilities. But there was no fear in it. Because for the first time, there was no doubt. No running. Just home.